For these notes, we're going to look at something called perfect squares. What that means is when you multiply a number by itself. And the reason is, if you think about, if I take 4 and then 4, if I multiply that together to make a square, I would get 16 for the area. So that's where the perfect square idea comes into play, is that if you make a square, the area is that number times itself. So the square of an integer is called a perfect square. So we're going to square our numbers. 1 squared means 1 times 1, which is 1. 2 squared, 2 times 2 is 4. 3 times 3 is 9. 4 times 4 is 16. 5 times 5 is 25. 6 times 6 is 36. 7 times 7 is 49. 8 times 8 is 64. 9 times 9 is 81. And 10 times 10 is 100. So this list that we wrote right here, those are the list of the first 10 perfect squares. So just a reminder, if you need to square a number on your calculator, you should have an x squared button. So for instance, if I wanted to do 7 squared, it would look like that. And then in your calculator, it looks like that with a 49. So now we're going to undo a square. So the reason we would undo a square is if we knew the area, so if we said a square has an area of 14, what are the side lengths? So you undo the square to get 4 for the side length. So the opposite of squaring a number is finding the square root. So that's what we're going to be doing, is we're going to undo a square, which is called the square root. Positive numbers actually have 2 square roots. So the reason is this: what numbers can you square to get 16? Well, 4 times 4 is 16. But negative 4 times negative 4 is also 16. Remember that we have to do negative 4 squared in parentheses, and we get positive 16. So every square root has 2 answers, a positive answer and a negative answer, because when you do 4 squared, you get 16, and negative 4 squared also gives you 16. Negative numbers have 0 square roots, no square roots. The reason is you can never multiply something by itself and get a negative number. A positive times a positive is still a positive. A negative times a negative is also a positive. So you cannot take the square root of a negative number. There is one number that has only 1 square root, and that would be 0. You can take the square root of 0. It's just itself. So the way we write square root, as you can see below, is this square root sign, the radical sign. So the square root of 0 is just 0. So this is called a radical sign or the square root sign, either way. If there's nothing in front of it, this means we want the positive square root. So if we look down below, number 1, we only need to have the positive answer. So 7 would be our answer, because 7 times 7 is 49. If you have a negative sign in front, that means they want the negative square root. So if we look at number 3, what times itself is 4? That's what you're asking yourself when you find the square root. Well, 2 times 2 gives me 4, but we want the negative one, because negative 2 times negative 2 also gives me 4. So if there's nothing in front of your square root sign, your radical sign, you just need the positive answer. If there's a negative sign in front of your radical, then you need to have your negative answer. Now, there is a square root sign on your calculator. So hopefully we know that 3 times 3 gives us 9. So the answer for number 2 is just 3. If you're not sure, this is what you need to do for these calculators. You'll hit the second button, okay, so this colored button up here, and then the x squared button. If you can see up above the x squared is that root sign. There's another one up here, but we'll talk about that later. So just a square root. And that's what it looks like. And then you can hit 9. You can end the parenthesis or you don't have to. That's up to you. And you would get 3. So for number 4, you have 2 options. You can just bring the negative down, and then in your calculator, you can do second and this squared button to get your square root, 289, and we get 17. So again, we already brought the negative down, so we want negative 17. You can do the negative sign on your own. So you could push negative square root 289, and you would get the answer of negative 17. So it's up to you if you want to just know to bring it down or if you want to type it in. Now, make sure you don't do this. If you do square root of negative 289, see how I moved the negative on the inside? Then your calculator is going to say you can't do that. So you need to make sure your negative is on the outside. So for number 5, we need negative square root of 196. So again, if you want to do negative square root 196, negative 14. Then we have 484. So second square 484 gives us 22. If you forget the squared button, you just have to start trying numbers. So for instance, we could sit here and try 15 times 15 is 225. 16 times 16. We would have to work all our way up till we get to 484. With fractions, there's 2 ways you can do this. Again, you can use your fraction button, and I'll show you that in a second. The other thing you can do is split this into 2 square roots. So square root of 1 over square root of 16. And just do them separately. So 1 times 1 is 1. 4 times 4 is 16. So the square root of 1 over 16 is 1 over 4. If we do that same thing over here, negative square root of 81 over square root of 25. Make sure you realize that negative goes in the middle. It doesn't go to each of them. You can always look up here to find your perfect squares. So 81, we know 9 is the square root of 81. So this gives us a negative answer. Square root of 81 is 9. Square root of 25 means what times itself gives us 25 is 5. So negative 9 over 5. Again, you can do those each in your calculator if you want. Then our last one, square root of 49 over square root of 144. Square root of 49 is 7. Square root of 144 is 12. So 7 over 12. Now, if you would like to check or use your calculator, again, you need to use parentheses when you type your square root in. So if I do this last one, 49 over 144, I would do second square root 49 ABC 144 and your parenthesis. And we get 7 over 12. If you want to do negative square root 81 ABC 25, negative 1 4/5. I do want it as an improper fraction though, since that's how it was given to us. So you need to do second ABC, enter, and that will change it to the negative 9/5. So if it starts as an improper fraction, it needs to stay that way. This last little bit, we're supposed to circle each value that is a perfect square. So again, you can do a couple of things. You can actually take the square root of each number. So you can do the square root and see what happens. So we should know the square root of 9 is 3. It was on our list. Is there anything that multiplies by itself to get 32? The answer is no. If you want to check in your calculator, you do square root of 32 and you get that yucky decimal. So that's a no. A lot of people think 25 because 25 times 2 is 50, but that is not a perfect square. There is nothing that when you multiply by itself, you get 50. And if you're not sure, there it is right there. 121. Square root 121 equals 11. So this one is a perfect square because it came out to a whole number. 1 is always tricky, but 1 times 1 is 1. So 1 is a perfect square. And again, we have that whole list at the top of our notes. 160 is not a perfect square. Again, square root 160 gives us a decimal. Square root of 64, we know that is because we wrote it up above. Square root of 200 gives me a decimal, so no. Square root of 324 gives me 18, so yes, that is a perfect square. All these other numbers are non-perfect squares. Lots and lots of numbers are non-perfect squares. It is good to be able to say the first 10 perfect squares. So that's something you need to hopefully be able to recite.